Hi, everyone. Today I'm going through my most mind shifting moments from the Mind Shifting Moments series. This show was created in order to destigmatize the psychedelic industry. That I wanted to create a forum where we could have transparent conversation and get some of these big questions answered by experts who are in the field and hands on from it every day. Because look, when we ask ourselves, what is a mind shifting moment, right? Let's start there. To me, I think of it this way. You guys know when you buy new pantyhose or new socks, and they come in the formation and they're formed like a little sock, and you get it, and that's the shape. But as soon as you take it off of that little cardboard cutout, it'll never really get back to that exact shape. And I like to think of my mind that same way, that there's certain conversations that I have with people. And through the course of that conversation, little shifts happened in the way that I perceived something and something that I thought that I knew becomes unknown and my belief system start to change. And at the end of that conversation, my mind has expanded. And once your mind has expanded, it's like that sock formation. It will never go back to that old form. It'll never hopefully go back to that old mindset. And so my goal with creating this episodic content, if you will, but this show is so that we can have more of those moments together and have some of those aha things that change our perspectives, change our mindsets, and open us up to being more receptive to alternatives. And that doesn't just have to mean alternative medicines, but alternative mindsets, alternative mechanisms, alternative remedies and resources. Where do we look to when we think about our mental health, when we think about our journey to whole being and our journey to wellness? So I'm your host, Margaret Williamson. I am head of partnerships at Nucleus, which is a venture studio where we create brands that aggregate data, educate customers, and even activate people inside of the psychedelic industry. So if this is a topic that you're excited about, and at the end of this episode, if you liked all of the things that I shared with you and your mind was shifted, then reach out to us. There's so many ways that we can get you involved inside of the psychedelic industry and the growing ecosystem that's being created. But I'm not going to take up too much of your time today. But hey, look, we've done 13 episodes over the last few weeks, and there's a lot to unpack in each one. And so I was telling everyone we need to do an episode where I can kind of quickly share some of these mind shifting moments. But hey, each of these episodes is like that conversation I was talking about, where there's so many things that happen through the course of the conversation that the residual effect at the end of it is a true mind shift. So I couldn't pick out all of the moments. So I decided to pick out my personal mind shifting moments from the episodes. And instead of going in a one, two, three, four numerical order, I want to sort of tell you a story because that's what life is all about, right? Our stories, our experiences. And the very first episode began because we had a partner inside of the Nucleus ecosystem that wanted to help more people through ketamine assisted therapy retreats, right? So where you take people into a different environment, whether that be into the wilderness or into a resort style setting, and bring them together for group assisted therapy, ketamine therapy, and just sort of different mindfulness exercises. We wanted to help them drive customers because I thought that, based on the science, based on the data, hey, it works. But the problem is people just don't know what it's like to go on a ketamine retreat. And so, aha, light bulb moment, right? The very first mind shift happened. And we said, hey, we need to do a little show where we talk about and we ask that question: what is it like to go on a ketamine retreat? What should I bring? What are we going to eat? Who else is going to be there? How do I know if this is something that I should do? So on that episode with Floresta Retreats, we unpacked. But the issue was, and what really stuck with me from that very first one was this idea of wellness tourism. That instead of us spending our hard-earned money and our hard-earned PTO time on a vacation that sometimes we need a vacation from when we return, because we return exhausted and sunburned and drained, but we got to get right back to work. Instead, let's flip that and use that same time and those same resources to invest in a vacation that's just as luxurious, just as adventurous, but so much better for us, where we can go through these mindfulness exercises and opportunities and integration sessions and come back renewed and refreshed and ready to get back to work. So that was my big aha moment from episode one. And then I started thinking, okay, on retreats. This is a ketamine retreat, but what other types of retreats are out there? And how do we know which one we should go on? And so that took us to having a conversation with Beyond, which is an ibogaine treatment facility in Mexico that uh, I know personally people that have visited the facilities, and they have nothing but just transformational testimonies to give about their experience there. And so I wanted to know, hey, is ibogaine right for me? Should I try ibogaine? And that was our big question for that episode. And my true mind shift came from their doctor, their chief medical officer, I believe, that said, hey, if something unexpected or disappointing happened in your life and you're feeling a little depressed and you're feeling a little down, that's normal and that's okay. And for me, that was a little like, right, I don't have to feel bad about feeling bad. But if that feeling badness starts to manifest itself in symptoms that prohibit you from enjoying your daily life, from going to work, from participating in activities that once made you happy and excited, then that's a time to start seeking help, right? Because there is help available. Now, if ibogaine is right for you, that's a question to have with your doctor, but it is best suited for those people with treatments and with addictions. And it really helps to allow them, that my key takeaway was to allow them to go through an addiction recovery program without the horrible side effects of withdrawal and without going through that sort of 10 days of hell that so many people say they experience when having to detox from any type of opioid or alcohol addiction. And now I'm jumping around, and that takes me to an episode that we filmed with Livy McKay from My Tepi. And she comes from the cannabis industry, and she's now uh, trying to help people just, find the right strains. But the real mind shifting moment and what the conversation really circled around was she ended up suffering a stroke that sent her into seizures. And they put her on so much medication that it made her unable to stay in school, unable to hold a job, unable to participate in daily life. And the only way that she was able to first break that initial um, kind of prescription addiction is kind of what I would call it, kind of this prescription epidemic, is by utilizing cannabis. Now, fast forward a few years later, and she's a woman, and she's now suffering from fibroids, and she ends up having to have a hysterectomy. I can say all this testimony because she shares her full story on the episode. I'm not sharing anything that you wouldn't find out there. And in the course of that treatment, she says this story of, there was one doctor on her medical team that said, hey guys, after maybe a few months, maybe even a year of this like long litany and list of pharmaceuticals that they had prescribed to her and that she was taking, that said, hey, maybe she's not sick anymore. It's the medicine that's making her sick. And she said that doctor was removed from the team and reprimanded. And that just to me was like a big light bulb moment that there's an agenda going on here. There's an agenda that is bigger than our health and bigger than our well being. And we first need to see that and recognize it. And then we can start asking why. And once we start asking why, then we can start asking, well, what's right for me? Once we no longer feel bound by this traditional system, because we understand that perhaps the traditional system is not meant for my best interest, it's for someone else's best interest. And so that led me to say, okay, if now I've broken my stigma, I'm open minded, I'm thinking about, okay, what treatment, how do I treat my bouts of anxiety or depression? And when is it something I should treat? And when is it just something that I just need to take a morning off or go for a walk? And that leads me to an episode we filmed with Beckley Retreats. And on there, Neil Markey, their CEO, talked about his experience not only in the military, which was the big mind shift for me, but this other one into Thai. That episode was full of so many gems that really changed my perspective on a lot of topics. But this one specifically, right? How do we know when it's the right time? Like when is not normal? And he talked about his coworkers at a private firm experiencing the same type of fight or flight responses and tendencies as his coworkers in his SEAL team, in his, Ranger team, I'm sorry, in his Ranger team in the military. And he used one example of toothbrushing. That his coworkers felt anxiety. He would feel anxiety even taking those 2 minutes and brushing your teeth. Like, I need to be doing something else. I'm constantly looking around. You can't relax even for the 2 minutes that it would take to brush your teeth. And that for me was like light bulb, right? When it starts impeding your enjoyment of everyday life and activities, it's okay to start wanting to seek treatment, right? Now, we don't have to go to extremes, but you need to start somewhere, right? And so, where do we start? And that takes me to an episode that we filmed with Dr. Ivan Castleman. And he works with Haven Life and I met him on a retreat that I went on. After going through all these episodes, I signed up for a retreat, and that's where I met Dr. Ivan. And he is just a true um, lover and believer in the power of mushrooms. And so the big question was, hey, is psilocybin the gateway psychedelic? And that conversation centered around so many cool topics. But one of the key takeaways was understanding where this term gateway drug, right? Gateway came from and why it was turned into something maleficent or something that could lead you down a bad path, right? And for me, the big mind shifting moment in that is say, hey, we determine where the gateway leads to, right? If you're entering into the psychedelic industry for the wrong reasons, then that gateway could lead you down a, a dead end, right? And in many senses of the word. Or if you're entering it with an open mind for positive reasons, looking for healing, looking for opportunity, for growth, then that gateway can lead you to a higher level of consciousness, a more empathetic state, right? A shared level of empathy. And that takes me to a couple episodes that were among some of my favorites. We talked to Dr. William Kalatsky from the intuition method. And the question was, how do we exercise our minds? But the key takeaway was that, there are things that we can do that right now we can begin to feel the energy that's around us all the time, right? And he took us through one exercise. Maybe I'll do it really quickly. I'll check the clock. Yeah. So if you take your hands, right, you rub them together, and we've done this, right, you can automatically feel the heat. So we know friction is energy and friction is going to produce this response, right? Then if you pull your hands out a little bit, right, and then you can kind of bring them back in, start to feel like that force. It's like a magnetic force. You can feel the energy, right? And you can start to like build it up, and it's almost like you can't push your hands together because that energy is behind you. And the reality is that energy is around us all the time. And through his method, you can really tap into what's already here and around us. And through that, we can begin to sense which decisions are in our best interests and which aren't in our best interests, right? And that's what we're talking about today. How do we pick what's right for us? And how do we feel like there's an open pathway to what could be right for us? And so that was such an aha moment. I say definitely watch that episode, sign up for his course. It's amazing. You can start to see auras, um, and do so much with your inner tuition, right? Because all of us, this whole thing is about going inside of ourselves. And that takes me to an episode we filmed with the director of New Life, JP. And it was, hey, how can the future of psychedelics respect its past? Because we know that this inner work, right, it's very ritualistic, it's very ceremonial. And I think sometimes we see a lot of people do it wrong with the right intentions. And so, hey, it was like, how can we do it right? Uh, and he explained the origins of a lot of these rituals and this plant medicine being used in certain ceremonies. And he explained why there's cultures and there's communities that want to keep that private, and which ones should be for private use, and which ones we can adopt and be used for the masses. And there were so many light bulb moments. And I say, yes, watch that so you can get a deeper understanding of it all. Um, but that the main takeaway was, again, like, it was all through misinterpretation, that now we view this uh, psychedelic ceremony and something that is confined and closed in, where we stay in an enclosed space and we're quiet, where he tells a story that it was a celebration. It was a way to reach out to this other plane, to this other level of consciousness. And it was to be done out in the daylight with dancing and joyfulness and praise and worship and all of these things. But because then colonizers viewed that as an uprising, that they slaughtered that community, and then that forced them to come inside and to tame down and quiet down their experience and their rituals, so that even in our desire to not appropriate certain cultures and cultural traditions, that's what we're doing, because we're not taking the time to understand the true origins of them, right? So our heart is right, but we can take the wrong steps. But through partnering with those indigenous communities, we can start to understand their why, so that it ours doesn't always supersede theirs, right? Big takeaway and little mind shift there. And then that takes me to a conversation that I had with Zappy Zappelin, who is one of the founders of the Mind Army. And the question was, hey, why do we need a mind army? Right? Why why are these plant medicines illegal? Why can't we use what's in nature to go inside of ourselves? Or if these compounds were created decades ago and had case studies and proof studies done then, why do we have to go through it again now? And that's what the Mind Army is sort of fighting against, right? They're fighting for our rights to go inside of ourselves for healing. But the big mind shift from his episode was, whoa, putting it into perspective. And he had a line that says, if some of the school shooters were had the opportunity to go through a ketamine assisted therapy program, that those incidents perhaps might not have happened, right? He said they definitely would not have happened. And that's just, it's something that, right, we will not know, and so it's not proper to suppose, but it is something moving forward to think about, right? And think about what is the right age, or when is the right time to start taking our children, ourselves through not necessarily psychedelic assisted therapy, but through mindfulness exercises, to be cognizant of our mental health and understand that our mental health is separate from our physical health, but they are very much connected and intertwined. And that sometimes when we're experiencing these physical symptoms, it's because of a mental trigger. And we need to explore. And just as we make doctor's appointments, we should have mental health doctor appointments. Just as you exercise your body, we should be exercising our brains. Just as we feed our body nourishing and good foods, we should be feeding our brains nourishing and good foods, so that these two systems can begin to work together. And that led me to, right, okay, if how do you access them? Right? We're still in a phase where so many of these compounds are not yet legal in the United States. And so many of the retreats are happening abroad, that I wanted to say, what are our options if we want to stay closer to home? And that took me to some conversations I had with Keta MD. And the questions were, hey, what is ketamine assisted therapy, at home ketamine therapy, like? And she walks through all the ins and outs and how it works. But my biggest takeaway with that is how it's administered, right? And I'm figuring, people coming in and attaching an IV drip, or I'm having to do an injection myself, or maybe put something up my nose. But she explained that it's done in a lozenge, that it's a dissolvable, and that eased my mind. So that was a little key shift and mind shift from that episode. And then Warren, their CEO, explained why in-home therapy needs to be a viable option, right? We all went through COVID, and this whole telehealth community just really exploded. And I've always been a little bit hesitant. I remember being pregnant and my OBGYN wanting to do a telehealth appointment. And my thing is like, what is the point here? I really didn't get it. But through the conversation with Warren, I understand that for so many people, just the idea of coming out of your house, going to the doctor, finding a parking space, having to deal with all of these triggers and external indicators, is just too much, right? Or at least it's enough to say, I don't want to give it a try. I'm just going to tough it out one more day. And so in-home therapy options are so important in people's pathway to healing. And so I'm excited for the work that they're doing in kind of expanding their work there. And then there's also this opportunity with combining this future of medicine and psychedelics with another side of a future of medicine in stem cells. And we spoke with a wellness center called Imuna that's based in Colombia that's combining stem cell therapies with psychedelic medicines, right? That's kind of where they're taking things. And to the idea that we could go on this wellness tourism vacation to a beautiful, like the coffee region of Colombia, and experience not only inner healing, but also external healing through some of their like stem cell facelifts or shoulder surgeries, hair transplants that take the downtime and the post operative recovery time down to almost zero. So that he talked about customer testimonies where then they were hiking, through the fields in Colombia, through this Narnia style landscape just a day after their stem cell treatments. And so that was so exciting. I'm pushing the time, but here's where I want to leave us, right? Is when we think about psychedelic medicine and the psychedelic industry, right? This is going to, I'll take it to a quote with Najla Guthrie. We had her on an episode. She is the founder, one of the founders of the Women in Psychedelic Network. And she said, as a scientist, right? And she kind of calls herself, right, a kind of a science nerd. And she said, I haven't been this excited about a scientific development in decades. And she says she knows that psychedelics are going to transform the way we treat mental health care. And the reality is that it's most drastically, in my opinion, going to affect women. That women by far are prescribed the most antidepressants of any group, right? Women by far suffer from PMDD, PMSD, PMS without any real remedies that psychedelics can provide some remedies to these things. And so women not only are going to sit at the center or should sit at the center of this industry from a use case scenario and benefit, but also from a decision making standpoint. And so the Women in Psychedelics Network, and also another one of my guests, Olivia Mannix, who's working with My Felicity, who's focusing on those women's therapeutics, that's a big opportunity, right, for all of us, not just as women, as users, but as women, as men in the community, because we're all affected by the health of the women in our communities and in our environments. And as this industry explodes, keep that in mind as you are seeking out opportunities to increase not only your stock portfolio and your financial forecast, but also your mental health, the mental health of your family, of your friends. Keep an open mind, keep asking questions. If you have a big question that you'd love for me to ask, please send it to me at margaret@withnucleus.com. I'm excited to continue to unpack these topics with you guys as we dig deeper into more mind shifting moments. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next week.